Hello, everyone. Welcome to our teacher webinar this evening. We're just taking a minute while attendees join. While we do that, I'm going to introduce myself and our guest and do a bit of, housekeeping. So first of all, my name's Murray. I am the founder of Tassomai. I'm really delighted to be joined this evening by Claire Crichton Allen, who a few years ago took on Tassomai in her school, and she'll tell you a bit more about it. But they were very quickly on our rankings, our #1 star school, and there was clearly some amazing work going on at that school under Claire's leadership around implementation of Tassomai. And we got talking at the time. She had some really useful insights and stories to tell. So that's the purpose of this webinar, is mostly to pick Claire's brain. But I'll hand over to her a little bit now and let her introduce herself.
Thank you. Thanks, Murray. Yes, my name's Claire Crichton Allen. I was a teacher for about 18 years in the mainstream, 5 of those as a head of faculty, science faculty in the northwest of England. And we took Tassomai on, I think it was about 18 months before I moved on from there. I'm currently now working in HE. But to this day, I have very, very fond memories of working with Tassomai and I have to say, the really substantial impact that it had for our students.
Thank you. Excuse my umming and ahhing. So first of all, the purpose of today, I think, is to just get a little bit of extra information, tips and advice for you in your school as to how you might make more out of the program, a few ideas and things to inspire. This is not presented with slides and impressive graphics. It's Claire in her house and me in this dilapidated shed in the East Midlands. So this is not a visual medium, this webinar, to which end, if you are thinking about getting in the car and heading home after a long day and you want to just put this on audio and listen from your phone, that'll work just fine. It is also being recorded. So we had a lot of people sign up that say we can't make the time. So we're recording it and we'll share that with people to be able to watch later. Next thing is to say that if you have questions that you'd like to ask Claire or even me or Sam, who is also with us and sort of being our producer in the background, please put your questions in the Q&A. We'll have time to get to those during our conversation or afterwards. But yeah, the main point today, I think, is to talk about implementation and working with your team to make the most out of this resource, different ideas that you might find useful and spark ideas that will work in your own context. So first of all, just setting the scene a little bit, Claire, about the school where you were using Tassomai at Matthew Moss. Can you tell us a little bit about that school, the context and the situation you were in when you sort of took on Tassomai as a tool, the why part, I suppose?
Yeah, definitely. So the school we were at was a mainstream high school, 11 to 16, based in Rochdale, in Greater Manchester in the northwest of England. Our demographic was quite varied, but I think it's fair to say that quite a substantial number of our students came from areas of socio-economic deprivation. We had quite a lot of English as additional language. We had a lot of students who had additional needs, and we had quite a substantial number of students greater than the national average that were in receipt of pupil premium. So, you know, there were quite a lot of challenges in terms of local kind of context in terms of the school that we worked at. Fantastic school to work at because the team that we worked with and the team that I led there were nothing short of superstars. And a real passion for supporting the students that we worked with. In terms of where we were when we came across Tassomai, I think it's fair to say that we were really struggling in terms of converting what felt like an awful lot of hard work on our part and the students' part into outcomes that really were congruent with the kind of effort level we were putting in. And I think there was just something missing. And Tassomai had been something that I hadn't heard of, but the deputy head, who was our line manager at the time, had spoken to a colleague who had been at one of the Pixel conferences, I think, who had come across Tassomai and had used Tassomai in the previous academic year, and again had seen the impact that the platform could support with the right efforts. And the deputy just approached us with the, do you think it's worth a go? And at that point, in all honesty, there wasn't very much we would have said no to. So we said yes, and very quickly got in touch with the Tassomai team, who came to kind of talk us through how we could potentially implement it. Which would have been, it wouldn't have been right at the beginning of the academic year either. It was part way through the academic year.
Yeah, I feel like I remember that being a mid-year start. So I suspect that most people listening to this, either now live or later, are using Tassomai in their school already. So they may have had a similar experience. This is something that somebody in SLT has said, "Oh, I've heard you should try this," or somebody who's joined the department has brought it in or something. I think often we hear from schools who've set it up, but there's a challenge around getting Tassomai set up. Not just getting it set up and launched, but what I mean is getting teachers to buy into it, and getting teachers to adopt, really sort of make it part of their practice, and likewise getting students on board and getting them enthused. I feel like at Matthew Moss, you had tremendously high engagement with staff and students. So how did you kind of go about actually winning hearts and minds, getting them on board? Was there a kind of a strategy to that, or was it part of your culture already to just be really cohesive in the way you did things? Well, we can tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think we were very fortunate in terms of the school had a culture where there was a culture of being innovative. There was a culture of trying new things. It wasn't a school that was afraid of sitting outside kind of the norm. That certainly helped when people came in with new ideas and new approaches. But I think the key, and I think this is the key to any successful strategy, was that we were very, very clear about why we were attempting to try something new. And it was very much about in the communication to the people who would be at the chalk face supporting the implementation of this new strategy, as to why we were doing it. So it was very much a team effort in terms of gathering the team together in order to be able to talk through the reasons as to why this was something that we were considering, to talk through what the intent of using it would be, so that we could agree how and why we were going to use it in terms of that implementation. And I think there was one key thing that we did very, very early on, which I'm not sure whether is always an initial consideration when getting something like this into schools, is we brought our IT team very into the conversation really, really early. And that was because what we needed to have was a team that was very focused at the chalk face with using this with students and really encouraging engagement with students and working with it from that kind of initial interface of this is how we are going to work with it, and the background of how it synced with groups and all the admin stuff that just needs to be in place, otherwise it's not going to work, needed to be on the desk of somebody who really knew how that was working. If that I think had sat within the team, the science department, that would have made things quite difficult. And we were very lucky, again, as I say, to have an amazing IT department which was able to kind of take the weight of those decisions and administrative tasks off us and work directly with Tassomai. So there's a triangulation really of teams. We had senior management support, we had faculty support, and we had the IT support, all working together really to make sure that this became something which was in school.
Yeah, that's really interesting, that kind of the three-part triumvirate that you mentioned. And I think a lot of schools maybe overlook the importance of involving their IT staff early on to make sure there aren't sort of technical snags or barriers. So it's a really good tip. The SLT and the faculty side of things, I want to pick up on that a little bit. And so whilst I've been in the classroom and I've spent a lot of time with software developers, so my terminology is going to have changed a little bit, but it feels like when you're setting something up to succeed, you need to get people to buy into it, of course. And that buy-in in large part feels like you need to kind of say, if we do it right, we can expect these results, a kind of clear idea of what good looks like. And for SLT, that maybe is, we'll get better outcomes next year, fine. And that's a very lagging metric. You have to commit for a long time and then wait till August and see if it worked. Were there things you talked about with your team? This was science only when you set it up, I believe. Was there things you talked about with the science department and with students who you were asking to do the science homework that said that were more kind of short term? Say, if you do this way, you can expect to see benefit A, B, or C. Were there things like that you talked about that were a little bit more tangible and short term rather than just go jam tomorrow, you know?
Yeah. Oh, definitely, because it's not the jam tomorrow that's going to sell it to the students, particularly. I think one of the key things I remember being quite prevalent in the conversations was because of the way that Tassomai was low stakes testing in terms of engagement and repetitious questions that enabled students to become really familiar with foundational knowledge. It was a conversation around learners can't apply what they can't recall. And what I think felt we were spending quite an awful lot of time doing was trying to work with students in terms of application of knowledge that just wasn't there. I remember working with my second year faculty at the time, who had her head in her hands one afternoon because I think it was the night before the chemistry 1 exam, and a student had asked her, so Miss, can you tell me what an electron is again, please? And there was this kind of realization that what we were trying to do with students was possibly not having impact because there was a piece missing. And I think when we came across Tassomai, it was quite quickly evident that some of that repetitious engagement with that foundational content meant that students very quickly began to recognize that I remember that from, I did Tassomai last night and they said that, or you would mention something in classroom and then they would start to make the connections. And in itself, that is quite a nice kind of positive feedback loop for students to feel in terms of the process. We all like a bit of instant gratification, and because of the way that Tassomai kind of gave that initial and quite quick and rapid feedback, I think that played into the kind of notion that students really enjoy that kind of engagement leads to something, so they could begin to feel the benefit.
Yeah, I imagine everyone hearing you say that will have a similar story of, I mean, I remember this is why I built Tassomai, was a student asking me in term 6 what mitochondria was, that we'd done in term 1. And it's why we adopt spiral curriculums and things like that, isn't it? To just try and make sure we keep all those plates spinning. But it's every student has a different plate that's about to fall off the peg. And that's why I tried to build a software like this that could keep all that knowledge recall fresh and personalized. The level of success or not is a question we're always trying to work on. But yeah, when you see a school trial Tassomai and then they say after 2 weeks, there was someone who never puts their hand up, had their hand up, and they knew the answer to the first starter question, and they were involved in the rest of the lesson in a better way. It feels like a big win. So what you're telling your staff is get on board with this and drive it a bit as homework, and you'll find the teaching a little bit easier, a little bit less frustrating. Or is it a workload question? Or for people thinking about, I want to just drive this a bit harder or relaunch it, what do you think would be the kind of best message to tell the team, do this and this will happen? Is it about ease of lesson teaching, or is it about something else?
Yeah, I think it was just the fact that the impact for students was quite evident and manifest quite quickly in the classroom from just that engagement with that knowledge that they recognized, and they could then have a level of confidence coming into lessons, or they could answer questions. I think the big thing with anything like this is you've got to be consistent, insistent, and persistent. And in fairness, anybody who is listening and who may know me will know that that is one of my virtues or faults, to be fair, because you do need that one person who is going to say, right, this is going to be my baby. Tassomai was definitely something that I felt ownership of, and made sure that the kind of book kind of stopped with me in terms of the monitoring and the supervision of what was happening and how it was being rolled out in the classroom. And I think, supporting staff who may have questions about how accessible this may be, or how useful this may be, and being someone who is there to support them and find out what the barriers may be kind of helps a little bit more, rather than just kind of the whip. It's more of a kind of what can we do to remove those barriers. And, you know, as I said earlier on, you know, we were in a school where we had significant issues around areas that were quite deprived, in terms of some students didn't possibly have access to IT and digital interface, etc. So we asked the questions about what we could do as a school to kind of support them in accessing that. So what we tried to do was we tried to look at it as this is happening, and therefore, in order to ensure that everybody has equity of opportunity to engage in it, what do we need to put in place, rather than let's you know, reprimand the kids when they haven't done or they're not engaging. It was a case of what can we do to support those who are finding it difficult.
Right, and I think that's such an important piece of the puzzle, isn't it? It's just making sure you're giving everyone the opportunity to use it. So what did that? I'm going to come on to D6 later. That's something we'll bring on to later, which was an amazing scheme that was run at Matthew Moss. But just in terms of day to day, what was the sort of provision that you had to think about putting in place for those students? Was it sort of breakfast clubs and lunch breaks and after schools and equipment, or because this was pre-COVID, before everyone was sent a laptop or whatever was supposed to happen?
We were quite well resourced in terms of IT. We were very quick to make Tassomai an expectation in terms of daily goals. So students were tasked with keeping on top of daily goals, and we had leaderboards. And I would go around classrooms as much as possible every lesson to ensure that I reminded students that they needed to keep on top of daily goals and engage with their Tassomai. I think when we first originally brought it in, we were primarily focused on the year 11s, although I think we had brought it in for the whole of Key Stage 4 at that point. So there were regular reminders, but what we did do is we would have lunchtime access to the computers in science. We worked with form tutors to suggest if we knew students were struggling to access laptops and Chromebooks, that they could come up during form time, that we always had a kind of opportunity for students to be able to do during that form time period. We would have Tassomai Club after school, and we would do everything that we could to ensure that there was adequate opportunity, because I think at the time it was something like 15-20 minutes a day in terms of engagement. In order to reach your goal, that there wasn't really a space within the school day that if you really needed to, you couldn't access some form of laptop or Chromebook in order to be able to engage with it. So it was about trying to find the opportunities to support students in doing that. And obviously, as we'll come on to in a little while, we also had the great initiative which was that extra time during what we called D6.
Yeah. So you talked about kind of providing everyone with the necessary resources to do it, and making it part of the culture. And it sounds like you had the team behind you, but also sounds like what you're saying is you need an individual who's kind of championing this loudly, rather than expecting it to be sort of a flat structure of everyone doing it. That's okay. That's interesting. Beyond that sort of, if you like, that intrinsic motivation of kind of like do your Tassomai and you'll feel more confident. Did you have extrinsic, did you have kind of incentives, prizes for top users or sanctions, which we see at a lot of schools? Or what was your approach that brought you so much success?
Yeah, we tried not to sanction students for not completing their Tassomai. We found that most students wanted to do the right thing, and therefore detentions and making Tassomai something which was associated with I've got to do it because I'll get into trouble if I don't, seemed to be the wrong reason to engage with it, because that just would encourage people to mindlessly engage with it. We needed them to engage with it because they wanted to engage with it purposefully and meaningfully, because it was going to have impact. So we just went for the whole, let's be competitive about this. So science teachers, I think most of the profession would suggest, are quite competitive. We would have leaderboards with staff. We would have leaderboards with students. We encourage staff to bring up their Tassomai leaderboard in their class of their group at the end of every lesson, just to check who was really uber engaging with it, and maybe who might have needed a little bit of a I suppose red face in the corner, I've not been on this week. And who doesn't like to get to the lunch queue early? So we didn't have an awful lot of money. We couldn't really buy students huge prizes, but what we were able to do was to give a weekly front of lunch queue pass for top engagers, which was gold dust. I mean, I couldn't believe how much economic value this pass had. We actually had students trying to win them so they could pass them on to friends, etc. And but it was a really great way of students desperately wanting to be so engaged that they could win this very, very cheap prize.
It's 10 minutes with a laminator, right? And you've got 5 tokens to hand out. I know of another school who did similar things where the token allowed the bearer plus 3 friends to get to the front of the queue, because they discovered if one person who's done the most work goes to the front of the queue, then they're sitting on their own in the lunch hall waiting while everyone else is looking in the queue. So it's like you and 3 mates, and then they're total heroes to their friends because they've got them to the front as well. But I really like that approach, because it's rewarding them for their time and effort with time back. Suddenly they've got more lunch break, and so I really like that approach. Really, really nice. So, but interesting you didn't use sanctions. I know a lot of schools do have kind of detentions and catch up after school things, and they're using that to great success. But I think it's really interesting hearing a different approach culturally, and it just sounds as though in your school, by whatever mechanism you got there, you had a really nice culture of students really wanting to make that effort, which is fantastic.
Yeah, we did. And if students were kept behind for other reasons, etc., we would roll the laptops out and use detention time. And we worked with other faculties to suggest that as an option as well. If students were engaged in school for one reason or another and being kept in detention, then can we not use that as an opportunity to get them to engage with their Tassomai? So yeah, just any opportunity really to get them on it.
Well, and we've mentioned D6 a couple of times in passing, which when I heard about it at the time was just the best news I'd heard all month, all year. It was something I found so exciting as an initiative. So without having explained at all what it is, could you tell us what D6 stands for and what D6 was, please?
Yeah. Again, our head at the time, a great chap who was very innovative, very capable of thinking outside the box, was very aware of kind of a combination of issues that some of our students faced. The first was obviously access to quiet study space and access to personal tuition. Personal tuition wasn't something that a lot of our students' parents could afford. Even just access to somewhere nice and quiet to be able to study outside of school was often a problem, and particularly, as I've mentioned, obviously the access to IT facilities as well. And the second thing that he noticed was that a lot of our former students would, when they went on to college, would go and have part-time jobs, cleaning tables, working in fast food restaurants, etc., on minimum wage. And I think it made the connection. It was a great way he explained it. He said, well, I've got the keys to the school 6-7 days a week. Why don't we just open on the 6th day and make day 6 a teacher-free zone where school facilities can be used by students to study with their peers and from their peers, and let's get some of our former students back who have just successfully navigated GCSEs and got to sixth form and college, etc., as support as student and peer tutors. And it kind of went from there, and it was something that I think externally people may have looked at. Kids coming to school on a Saturday morning. We were very quickly very inundated with kids coming to school on a Saturday morning, and D6 has been an absolute revelation for that particular school, but also other schools locally which have now started to take that approach on. And the great thing about that was it was a case of, if you'd not been able to do your Tassomai this week during the week, you can get to D6. There's no reason why you can't go into D6 and use the computers and get your Tassomai done on Saturday morning. So again, it was just another tool that was available for students.
And I remember hearing about it at the time, and I, between my kind of teaching and other sort of variously unsuccessful careers, I did a bit of tutoring, and I was really struck by how inequitable, that's not the right word, it is. It's really a pay to win kind of scheme, and I felt very uncomfortable with that. It's one of the reasons I built Tassomai, was to kind of like make it possible for people who couldn't afford tutoring to do some sort of self-directed revision. Anyway, one of the issues I found with tutoring as a model was it was often very unclear to the tutor, who didn't know the student, and the student themselves, what they needed to practice, what they needed to work on. And what I loved hearing about in D6 was that you had the student tutors looking at the dots and using the kind of analytics side of Tassomai to go, okay, we need to practice this. I mean, this was before the tree, wasn't it? This was when you
Yeah,
had
yeah,
dots hanging up.
it was before the tree, and yeah, that was exactly how it was used. Again, students are quite often unaware of what they need to work on. Students will start at page 1 in the revision guide, and what they don't know about page 1 in the revision guide, but they never really get much further than that. And it's very difficult to be impactful if you can't intervene on the source book. And what Tassomai did very well was identify the gaps and the issues and the things that students needed to zone in on, and very quickly, by being very strategic and focusing on those things and intervening very specifically, students were able to again amplify that progress that they were making. And so it was a case of working with the D6 coaches, because that's what they were called, the D6 coaches, to just explain how Tassomai gave them that diagnostic, for want of a better phrase, that enabled them to say, okay, well, I'll tell you what we can do. We can look at moles, and then all of a sudden,
Always balls.
always moles, always moles. We're bypassing, all this section, and we're going straight in for the quick win. So yeah, it was a really useful and informative kind of diagnostic. And then as a result of that, students would then be able to see how their kind of impact would be improving, because they would engage in the questions, and obviously that would have made a big difference to their outcome.
Yeah, it's such an exciting idea, and it's the kind of thing I'd love to get word out to more schools to try, because it may be that even during Monday to Friday school time, after school club, where year 12s, if you've got a sixth form, who maybe know Tassomai a bit themselves, have got good grades in the relevant subject, whether it's science or English, and they know how the tree works, they know maybe even how the dots works, and they can sit down and do some peer tutoring to work through things, is a really nice idea. I can also say from experience, and slightly out of my own laziness, it works pretty well as well, just sitting down with a student and doing quizzes with them. And because the questions that are coming up are pretty much by design the things they need to be practicing today. And my tip, for what it's worth, is they're all color-coded, the questions. So those of you listening, you may know very well how it works, or you may not have taken on board the color coding. But questions can be yellow if they're new, or purple if they were previously answered wrongly in their corrections. And on those ones, I say you can help the student as much as you like to get the right answer, because they'll have to confirm that later by doing it again. And then there are sort of turquoisey ones and pink ones. Those are questions the students got right before, and we're asking, can you still get it right? And on those ones, don't help them, maybe even distract them, maybe even go, are you sure it's not 7? So you can sit alongside them, sit over somebody's shoulder and kind of coach them through a quiz, and give a lot of, like, in the moment, great coaching. And there's no reason the year 12 or year 13 couldn't do that as well, if they had a bit of spare time and you could incentivize them. Am I right? Did you say that you paid them something, but how did that work funding wise?
Yeah, the D6 coaches were they were just jobs which our previous students could apply for. There was criteria, etc. But they I think it was fair to say the head's rationale was, they need the money, we need them. We'll pay them a little bit more than national minimum wage, and it's great on their CV when they're looking to apply for, FE, HE, etc. So it was kind of a win-win, which was good.
Fantastic. I realized you mentioned something previous to when we were talking about D6 about running competitions in schools, and I'm going to kind of come back to that a bit more. I just want to point out as well to anyone who's using Tassomai right now, if you want to know where these leaderboards are and you haven't seen them, there are lots of resources in what we call data drops. If you go to your teacher hub, there's videos that explain the leaderboards we provide, that stand outside the app, and there's lots you can do within the app too. If you want any tips or anything like that, please get in touch. And I'm very happy to do a one-to-one session with you, talk you through how you can get the data, get leaderboards, all that kind of thing. And we can customize those leaderboards if you want to do head-to-head competitions between classes or anything like that, or competition between English and science, or geography and history and so on. So we can do loads of things around supporting intra-school competition. And I love that tip. I mean, I just think it's, for a lot of schools, it's really, really going to work. And you can get a kind of team house mentality between students to kind of drive that competition for the good. So Claire, you set up Tassomai and used it extraordinarily well. I mean, I'm hoping the answer to this is positive, but did you see that come through in terms of results in the years that you were using it?
Yeah, I think short of very easy answer there is yes. I mean, this is not to take anything away from the incredible hard work that the team are putting in, and the incredible hard work that the students were putting in, and obviously lots of things came together. But the one thing that we had done very differently that year, the one key thing had been introducing Tassomai, that real focus on engaging students in that low stakes testing that enabled them to build that familiarity with that core knowledge. And I think it was fair to say that, I mean, that particular year, we got the best results we'd ever had. We were surpassed national on all fronts, and particularly what was really interesting was the impact in terms of our PP gap, and the impact in terms of our top end. So it was our grade 9s that had really taken the lead in terms of their buy-in, and had a significant kind of improvement in outcomes. So all round, it really was, you could kind of feel the inertia had shifted. And there are no silver bullets in education. I say this a lot. There are plenty of werewolves, but very few silver bullets. And I wouldn't say that Tassomai was a silver bullet, because any tool is only as good as the kind of workman that's wielding it. It does have to be culturally embedded within the faculty. And it has to be something which is so present. It is almost in every conversation. It's there, it's in the rooms, it's on the posters, it's on the boards. It's conversations that we had at parents' evening to bring parents on side, because what is this Tassomai they speak of? My child is on their phone all night. They say they're doing Tassomai. What is this? Oh, that's actually a good thing. Yeah, that's great. And we could show the diagnostics to parents at parents' evening to show how this then was having impact. And bringing parents on board was definitely one of the things that we were really aware of, that fact that we talked before about the triangulation in terms of implementation, but in terms of the triangulation for impact, you need parents on board. Parents and carers really need to firmly understand what's going on. So we would always have at parents' evening some form of kind of Tassomai table, so parents could log in and have a go. In fact, you could sometimes not get the parents off the laptops because they got really engaged in having a go at the questions themselves. But and that in itself was particularly evident. So we had everybody talking about it. When we talked about when we reported home, we would have reference to the fact that after we'd written our reports and we'd spoken about student progress, one of the things that we would always do would be, and we would give things that students could do in order, next steps to improve their outcomes. And one of those comments would quite often be regularly engaging with Tassomai, completing their daily goals. So yeah, we saw the impact that year, and it was, yeah, it was very affirming to think that a lot of that hard work that we put into embedding Tassomai partway through the year. I mean, we didn't start this in September. I can't remember when it was, but it certainly wasn't right on the off. And I think part of the success may have been we realized that we really need to run with it very, very quickly in order to get it in. But it did, it did what it needed to do. And we felt very confident that we could attribute, quite a lot of that shift in inertia to the fact that we just had this other tool in our toolbox that we were able to kind of draw on.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I want to pick up on a couple of things you mentioned there. You mentioned parents and getting them involved. We've done a lot of work in the intervening couple of years to build much better tooling for parents. Now, most schools have most parents set up with a free account that gives them a weekly report on what's happening. And when they log in, they can see on a dashboard much more detail, including here a bite-sized article and a video to go and look at that are specifically related to topics your child has been struggling in this week. So that kind of stuff has had really good feedback from parents and schools. But the other thing was, as you say, the tool's only as good as the person who's wielding it. You know, whenever we see great impact coming out of schools using Tassomai, it's always come with really good implementation, and the staff who are driving it, fine, they're getting students to use it, but they're also taking a lot of inference from the data they're seeing to direct their teaching or intervention a bit, or maybe giving ourselves less credit. It's a job off their list, right? And they've just got more time to spend with the students who most need help. I'm not sure which side of that divide you fall on, but it was really interesting you saying that your top attainers getting their grade 8s and 9s improved. Do you think that was because they were doing Tassomai, or is it because staff had more time to finesse those students and get them the top grade? It feels maybe more the latter, but
yeah, definitely. I think, as I said earlier on, you can only apply what you know. And therefore, as you said, and we're always looking for things that make our life a little bit easier. You know, it's a difficult job at that chalk face 5 days a week. And that information and that feedback that teachers could glean from the Tassomai kind of circles was really informative in terms of if you had a group, and we would do this, we would put it up, and we had a group that a particular strand was particularly small in comparison with others, then we knew maybe there was something about the fact that that was something that we needed to focus on, and we would use that in intervention sessions, etc. Likewise. And I just think yeah, I just think it's just another arrow in your quiver. It is a tool that does incredibly well what it needs to do, so that you as a professional, you as a head of department, you as a busy head of faculty can actually get on with what you really need to do, because something else is taking care of some of those more fundamental elements.
now if anyone listening to this is using the software but maybe isn't that excited about the level of engagement, maybe it's flagging a bit, or maybe it's just never really got off the ground, but it's there, it's set up and ready to go. Do you have any kind of tips or advice for them, whether that's reaching students who are just hard to reach and hard to engage with this, or reaching teachers who are, you know, just not that into it and not driving it? Are there kind of initiatives you've considered or seen, or you think would work to help students, you know, to help teachers get the most out of the investment they bought it after all, and how can they get the most out of it and turn it around?
Yeah, I think very much it is about communication. I mean, I think going back, one of the key things that I would improve a little bit on is possibly across school communication in terms of what science we're doing, because you need an awareness across school about these initiatives when they come in, because students inevitably leave the science department. So science teachers might not leave the science department very often, but the students do. And those conversations would go into form rooms and into English, and other areas where it's just cajoling and support from other colleagues who would, you know, as a form tutor, ask their students, have you, can you? In terms of, you know, team members who may be struggling to see the benefit, or not really kind of pushing it as much as others, I think it's all about your context, and it's all about the culture of your department and the culture of your school. I mean, it's what everything works somewhere, nothing works everywhere, and it's about trying to find how you can operationalize the intent, but the intent has to be really clear. I think it's not a hard sell to colleagues when the why we are trying to do this is very clearly articulated and shared. It's a mission that everyone can buy into, because who doesn't want students to know more stuff? Who doesn't want students not to ask the daft questions the night before the chemistry exam, miss, what's an atom? Well, it's not, we're not going to be harming these students by forcing them to regularly engage with some low stakes testing that's going to do that kind of repetition of core foundational knowledge. It's going to be something where there's going to be some level of that's going to take hold, and therefore at some point we are going to have some benefit from this. Therefore, the few minutes a day that you may have to remind your class to do it, or the quick check at the end of the lesson. I think one of the questions what we quite often asked is whether we used it as homework, in terms of, was it a weekly homework? It was, as a science department, we never had a fixed year sevens get a homework on this particular day. Everybody must set a particular homework once or twice a week. What we did do was we said Tassomai is an expectation, and therefore Tassomai was in effect your weekly homework. And we always worked with the department and the faculty, professional knowledge and awareness. If you wanted to set, you had your professional freedom to set a piece of homework if you felt it was necessary for your class. But particularly with the hard to reach students, Tassomai wasn't difficult to engage in, whereas maybe a piece of homework may have felt more of a barrier. And it's all about what's the outcome you want from what you are trying to do. And the outcome was that we wanted students to have more knowledge, more confidence in that knowledge, more awareness, and an ability to be able to take that knowledge into an exam question and apply it. Can Tassomai help us do that? Yes, it can. Therefore, why is it a problem?
There's been a question coming on the Q&A, and please do ask more questions in there if you'd like to ask something, Claire. And it's on exactly this kind of topic. Is it sufficient, is the word used, to set Tassomai as homework, or should there be additional homework for students to do things like exam questions for exam classes? I want to take a quick crack at this, which is based on a lot of what you're saying, but the way I designed it is, my view was often my students doing exam questions before they had the knowledge to really make the most of it was slightly wasting the exam question, unless you're walking through model answer and so on. And I often found that was demoralizing students or helping them practice poor habits. So I took the view in developing Tassomai as a way of let's give you the knowledge that you need as a foundation, and then we can work on the technique of getting that knowledge out onto the exam paper and aligning to the mark scheme. But is that an approach you took, Claire, in your school? Did you kind of do Tassomai for a while and then phase into exam questions? Did you blend it, or what would your answer be to the question we've had?
I think in terms of the faculty approach was that Tassomai was an expectation in terms of a weekly engagement. Call that homework, call that D6 prep, call that whatever you may. There was a weekly expectation on students that they met their goals. We were very firmly, and I would say this to any fellow science teacher, it's professional judgment as to what homework you set at whichever point you need to. Yep, there's no one size fits all approach. I know for myself that there were classes that everyone had that expectation of Tassomai, but I just knew it was appropriate for them when we got to the end of a particular unit that we would use that and we would apply that to a piece of homework which was about exam question on a particular thing. I think it's, what is the purpose of homework? Is it to ensure that students are applying knowledge in order to be able to become more proficient at performance in the exam? Is it's just an expectation that schools set a particular amount of homework per week, and therefore, and I don't know what the culture of engagement with homework is in different schools. I know that there were, even across year groups, different groups had different levels of engagement with homework, and therefore, I'm a very firm believer in that kind of professional judgment when it's appropriate to focus on kind of exam questions, go for it. But as you said, and I think I've referred to before, it's demoralizing when you set questions such as exam questions, or even when you get to those dreaded mocks in January and you just suddenly staring down the barrel of the exams coming in 5 months' time, and your group has absolutely flopped because nobody has got X, Y, or Z correct. There's an element of, well, why am I spending 4 hours marking these when the students haven't actually brought any of that knowledge to those exams? So yeah, it's context. context. It is definitely context, but having it as part of that weekly expectation enabled us then, with that professional judgment, to decide when it was appropriate to set additional application style homeworks.
Yeah, I always really hesitate to advise teachers on how to do their jobs, but from my experience in the classroom myself and seeing other people do this as well with success, the problem I felt with sending people to do homework that was an exam paper or a page of an exam paper or something was that it was one again where the students most capable with the most support at home would do that homework and hand it in, and you mark it and they get a 8 out of 10, or they get a nice mark. And there were a lot of students who weren't doing that homework who were actually the ones that probably would most have benefited from having that coaching on that session. Whereas if you flip it a bit and you say your homework generally is to do this knowledge recall and just keep that knowledge fresh in your head and have it in a personalizing situation like Tassomai, that's the homework. And then in the classroom, we're going to go through some exam questions and talk model answers, and you can then write down your answer, and then we'll mark it in the session. You get the feedback right away. It just feels like everyone benefits, and the benefit is conferred mostly on the ones who might not have done it in the homework to the same extent. My big issue with homework was always the hugely lagging rate of feedback. You do the homework on a Monday, it's handed in on a Thursday, it's marked on a Saturday, you get it back the next Monday, by which time you've forgotten what it was. So anyway, I'm getting on my line. I have a big problem with homework like that.
And again, I think, in terms of professional time, or the time that is demanded on professionals in the classroom, there is very little time available, and therefore the time that we have needs to be spent doing the stuff that is really impactful. And marking a generic set of 30 pieces of homework at times can be incredibly time consuming and have very little impact, and the feedback that is required for those pieces it just can become quite burdensome, whereas at least Tassomai did the marking for you.
Yes.
And that again is another a plus point in terms of gives me back the time as a professional that I need to work with students on the stuff that's really important.
Yeah, well, thank you, Claire, so much. This has been really, really helpful. If anyone wants to ask any other questions of Claire, please do put it in the Q&A right away. But obviously, I did say at the beginning, this is a great one to join this webinar if you're driving home. If you're driving home, please do not put questions in the Q&A. Keep both hands on the wheel. But otherwise, yeah, please do add any questions for Claire. Otherwise, we'll probably finish up quite soon. Oh, here comes a question. So let's see on this one. So question asks, how many daily goals do you recommend a student does every week? Now we have it sort of in the app kind of codified, but at Matthew Moss, do you remember how many sort of daily goals you were asking to do? I'm not sure if
I'm not sure whether that was something which I can't. I wouldn't like to make it up. I certainly can't remember how they were calculated.
I also think a lot will have changed in the last couple of years that may affect that as well. Now, there are schools and there are students doing 6-7 daily goals a week, and that's fantastic. But to answer your question, Jane, from the way we've designed the app, we designed the app to say, starting on a Monday, we'd like you to do 4 daily goals, and that will complete your weekly goal. Now, this would be, if every teacher heard this and repeated this, I would be so grateful. You can do all 4 daily goals in one day. That's because we made a change to allow people to catch up if they missed a few days and things like that. And that was more about like accessibility and fairness. But it is much better to spread your daily goals over 4 days. The app will incentivize that. You get head starts and discounts and things like that. So spreading it over 4 days and doing 4 daily goals in 4 days is your ideal usage. And so when you're, as a teacher, looking on the dashboard, what have people done? What have they not done? If you see people's weekly goal 100%, that's your pass, right? They've done it. But then also have a look at the ticks on your dashboard. How many days have they done their weekly goals with? And if you see people doing their weekly goal all in one go and they've only got 1 tick, then that's a chance for you to have a kind of gentle word with them and say, this would be so much healthier for you and better for you if you could spread it out, because then the algorithms that do all that spacing and interleaving and differentiation kind of really play to their strength. One other thing is to say, drive them to do 4 daily goals in 4 days if you can, but also keep a close eye on accuracy, because if students aren't making their best effort to answer questions correctly, they get penalty points that slows them down, and they're spending a lot longer getting it done with less concentration. So I tell teachers to tell students all the time, if you improve your accuracy by 1 question each quiz, you halve the amount of time it takes you to do your daily goal. So just pushing your accuracy up 1 notch will give you back a lot of time. So those are my 2 points. 4 daily goals in a week, preferably spread, and focusing on accuracy and really encouraging and rewarding accuracy is my 2 points on that. Right, question for you, Claire. We have a big variety in similar classes engagement. Not quite sure I'm following what that means exactly. My class always seem to do it. My department have bought into the idea, but are not so active in encouraging their kids. How do I help them to do this? So this sounds like a communication issue between colleagues, and maybe support from SLT on rewards or something. But how did you manage to get such consistency in your approach, Claire?
We met regularly, obviously, as all science departments do. We would have weekly stand-up briefing. We would have our regular faculty meetings, and Tassomai would be part of it. I'm sure there are students in Rochdale that still to this day, when they hear my name, will literally hear the word Tassomai. I think one of them offered to have it put on my tombstone at some point. But it literally the app, the platform was with us all the time, and it was just a general conversation. And again, it was done in a very similar way that we did with the students. It was a conversation around, is anybody having issues checking their Tassomai this week? And I want to make sure they check their Tassomai this week. And as a head of faculty, I always did my best to try and get into classrooms where possible, and literally do a kind of walking tour of the department, where as I walked in, I think students started to chant Tassomai rather than actually wait for me to say, have you done? But yeah, it was not leaderboards necessarily with staff, but just that general conversation. Has everybody managed to? There's always that one member of the faculty that's forgotten their password. We'll give them the opportunity to fess up and sort it out with IT. But yeah, just having it part of your weekly standing briefing.
Yeah, that's a really great tip. And so it sounds like you weren't leaning too heavily on leaderboards, but more about making it part of the conversation, right?
Yeah.
If people do want to look at leaderboards like inter-class and like inter-class competition, the questioner sounds like they'd be top of the leaderboard, and maybe they'd enjoy that, but then maybe their lead would be eroded. You can do these sorts of things in our data drops, and I can build customized leaderboards for you if you just get in touch. I'm very happy to take you through it. But yeah, I would, route 1, go with what Claire's suggesting there, which is just to make it part of the conversation in the staff room weekly meetings. Maybe even ask colleagues to all take a look at their class dots grid and come back with an interesting insight that they've found in their data, because that kind of insight becomes quite contagious. Like, oh wow, you spotted this. That sounds kind of interesting. I'm going to look, that kind of thing, which is where the reward is the kind of the increased sort of like shared knowledge of how students are doing. And that's, after all, what we're all in it for. Any other questions, please do post them. Otherwise, I think we will wrap up there. I think it's always getting on as well. We're nearly at time. So from my perspective, I want to thank all of you for joining, either right now listening on your phones or in your empty classrooms looking to head home, or if you're watching this after the fact and you've got the recording. Thank you so much for joining. And would you all join me in thanking Claire for giving up so much of her time and to give us so much expert advice? It's really appreciated. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, let's leave it there in that case. And yeah, really do appreciate it. And thank you all for coming. If you have any other questions, or if you're listening to this after the fact and you have questions for us, please do get in touch with us at Tassomai. We're always happy to listen to your feedback, answer your questions, and help you however you like. I've mentioned a few times we can do lots of things with your data to help support implementation. Nothing well, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this. Nothing is too much trouble, but it's really not. It's like I live and breathe this. It's all I care about is helping you get the most out of this program. So get in touch and we will help. And if you've got questions for Claire, email them to us. I'm sure we'll be able to pass them on. She can get in touch and answer any questions you've got for her, I'm sure. So thank you all. Have a lovely evening and speak again soon.